Welcome back, everybody, to the Beyond the Decks podcast, your guide to mastering the art and business of the electronic music and DJ industry. And today I am incredibly thrilled. I'm always thrilled, but today I am super thrilled to be speaking with this gentleman, George Aponte. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
That's good.
Also known as his stage name, the Saliva Commandos. And George is a real veteran in the house music industry. He was born and raised in New York, in the Bronx, with a Puerto Rican background, which I can't wait to dive a little bit into. And he serves as the commander-in-chief of In Command Records, his own record label, with his own unique sound that has really kind of been growing a lot in the global awareness as George has managed to get tons of influential people playing his records and connecting. And it's not hard to see why, given some of the sounds and the groove. His first record released in 1996 under the moniker G Bravo with Miss Fernando, Serve on Progressive High 1996. And it wasn't until 3 years later where he acquired this moniker of the Saliva Commandos in 1999 with a white label release of Serial Buff. And since then, George has gone on to hone in and build his sound of this really tribal thundering drum, which I've come to appreciate a lot in my sets. And so super thrilled to have you today on the podcast, Commander-in-Chief, Saliva Commandos. George, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's me and my coffee. Thank you for having me. I'm honored.
I love it. Yeah, no, I mean, the honor is totally all mine. Like I said, when I reached out to you, George, the big thing that I found with your sound is you hear some of your tracks and it's such a distinctive thundering drums. And it's crazy because I watched some even just huge DJs, Roger Sanchez, David Morales, and they all talk about how you've come and created and curated your own sound. And that's been, quite an experience, right? For you, like I mentioned, you've been doing this for, I think it'd be 30 years at this point, or just a little shy of 30 years.
Yeah, I know. I don't think about the number. I just keep going. I put my head down and go straight.
I love that. But you start, let's go to the beginning, because I always like to try to go to the beginning with everybody I bring on the podcast, right? So you're born and raised in the Bronx, in New York. It's a tough place to live. From my understanding. And you've also mentioned, some of those times that you spent in your childhood in the Bronx have influenced, your sound today. So take us through George's first interaction with music and getting acquainted with this sound and seeing himself as potentially, becoming a DJ.
Yeah, coming from a Latino background, my dad used to play guitar. He didn't read music, but he would just play. Like as a hobby, he would get together with his friends and play guitar. So music was always in my house, and he would buy records. So did my sister. My older sister would buy records. But as a child, I'm a product of like the 70s, early, like mid 70s, late 70s and 80s. That's when this whole DJ thing, the hip hop thing was coming of age. So I was right there in the South Bronx. So when they would throw parties, like I was where we lived in a railroad apartment on Avenue St. John's in the Bronx. You can look right through the back window and see the schoolyard. That's where they would throw the street jams. Now I wasn't allowed, but I can see right through the window. So I was watching. It was like a movie for me. And that's where I would see the breakdancing and the DJs. And the big thing for me was that my neighbors had DJ equipment, which was insane. We're talking about 1978. They had DJ equipment, and at the time, I used to, I was into like whatever hip hop was out at the time, like Enjoy Records. I don't think Sugar Hill Gang was around yet. I think they came out like a year later. But so whatever those records were, they were around. Whatever those records were, I would listen to, and thought I was a rapper. I would want to emulate that. So they would bring me over. They would knock on my parents' door, and they would be like, "Hey, can George come over so he can rap?" And I would go over there, and I would have all these like raps that I would copy from the records. But for me, it wasn't about that. I was watching them DJ, and they would cut Cheeks Good Time, because that was one of the breaks that they would do. So that I remember watching them over and over, and I couldn't stop thinking about that. I wasn't into sports or any of that. That was what I was into. So that was kind of the beginnings for me. that was the little spark. Plus, my musical, the real musical influence comes from home. My dad buying records and my sister buying records, playing the records, and that's how you get influenced.
Hmm.
I didn't know. Back then you listened to the radio. There was no Sirius XM, satellite radio, so you listened to whatever's on the radio station, and they were not playing house music. One, it wasn't around. They weren't playing disco because that was super underground. They weren't playing hip hop because it was at its birth. So it was just like pop music. So that's what I would listen to. But like the disco stuff, it was my sister who would go, and she would go whenever she would get out to the clubs or hear something, she would buy those records. And when you only have like 5 or 6 records, that's all you listen to. So after a while,
Hmm.
you learn those records. So that's my influence and kind of my beginnings and introduction to the DJing, seeing it visually, not doing it yet, but actually visually seeing it, and just the records that my sister would buy. The disco stuff, I didn't know anything about that. Wasn't on the radio. My sister would buy them, bring them home, and play them, and I would be like, "Oh, this is cool." As a child, 8, 9 years old, you don't know any different, but that's what they're
Yeah.
teaching you. So I'm very fortunate for that. So
Hmm.
that's kind of just a quick rundown, of that.
Hmm. And did they ever like let you? I don't know. Your neighbors let you ever go like touch the equipment? I'm assuming it was like belt driven turntables or something.
Hell no. As a matter of fact, like across the building, there was a building we used to call, it's obviously called 920 Avenue St. John's, but we just called it 920 as kids. There were other DJs there as well. And they would play music, and we as kids would like hang out by the door, and they would open the door and let us listen. We weren't able to look inside. We would just hang out in the hallway, and then we just open the door. And it was more like a community, different time. So the neighbors didn't mind. They saw the kids staying out of trouble, just hanging out, listening to music. So yeah, that was kind of cool. But no, never touched any of it. That's later. Later, no one let me touch. No one let me touch a turntable, their records, none of that stuff.
When was the first time you got your hands on a turntable then?
That's in the 80s. I was actually, in New York City. I come from my family background. Like we had nothing. We had, you have no money. You Puerto Ricans. My parents. By the way, I'm this interview. I have animals, so I have dogs. So if my dog is barking right now, I hope you don't hear it. Yeah, as in the mid 80s, I got a summer job in New York City. Like I was saying, my family, we come from no money. So the New York City, I don't know if they still do this in New York. They would have government jobs for young teens. So you would work, and they would have a stipend that you would get. You couldn't get any more than that. It was just a stipend, and you work, and you would get a paycheck like every 2 or 3 weeks. So I decided that summer I would save all my money. It was probably like $600, and I bought belt drive turntables that didn't match. They didn't match because that's all they had. I wanted to DJ. I bought that. I bought this huge, massive. I mean, I knew nothing, and they probably saw me coming. I was just so young. They sold me anything. I bought this massive, mixer. I think I have a picture of it. It was massive, but I was able to plug in the 2 turntables, and it was with that I kind of started to practice. But I was already starting to buy records because I knew I was going to be a DJ. So I was going to the store. I bought Planet Rock. I bought stuff by Malcolm McLaren. I was buying all these records. I was into hip hop. So I was already starting my music collection before I bought my turntable. So we're talking about 1986. That's kind of when I first bought my turntables, and they weren't Technique 1200s. We'll get into that later. They weren't,
I feel like for DJs, it's a lot like that, though, right? We do start. There's something about the mind of DJing where it's. I describe them as like collectors, right? I think there's a difference between the producer mindset and the DJing mindset. And the DJing mindset is like a collecting mindset. It's like gotta have that one, gotta have that one, gotta have that one.
Yeah.
And so you said you're starting to collect these records, but you had a feeling. Did you already know that you wanted to be a DJ? Was it something in your consciousness or?
I knew it. And I say this all the time. My family laughs about it now, but I remember saying it, and my sister made fun of me. I'll never forget, my family made fun of me. They were like, "What? You're going to do what?" I was like, "I'm buying these records because I'm going to become a DJ." And they laughed. It's funny because now they all laugh. They're like, "Oh yeah, you were right." I go, "Yeah, I kind of, that's what I wanted to do." So I just knew. It's like, you know what? This is the way I can make people relate.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a young athlete, right? He's like, when I'm going to be like a young Derek Jeter, not that I'm at that level, but Jeter knew as a kid, he's like, I want to play for the New York Yankees and I will play baseball. He knew, I knew I didn't want to play sports. I was terrible at sports. And I knew that if I started to DJ, I said, I'm going to be very good at this because I was already mixing in my head. I was like, that record should mix with that record. And if I would go to a party, it's funny, you go to like these Sweet 16s or whatever when you're young, and I would say, that doesn't match. I would never put those two records together. So I already knew, like my thinking was already way ahead. I didn't know that at the time. That's just the way my mind was working. So yeah, I knew early on, like that's what I wanted to do.
Was it just the experimentation mindset or that drew you to it? Was it the ability to create something that wasn't before, but with using two records? What was it that you think really drew you? Because it sounds like you had this like internal fire, internal passion for this desire to be a DJ. I'm just super curious.
I've always been creative. I used to draw. Like I said, I wasn't really into sports. I was into filmmaking, TV shows, drawing, and music. That's what. And just being creative. So, and the influence of where I grew up, that was something in the inner cities. This whole new hip hop DJing thing, this wasn't something that everyone, it's not like today, 2024, where kids they don't want the guitars. They want the Pioneer, that's what and we'll get into that part too. It's like they don't want guitars anymore. So back then that didn't exist. So it was part of my environment, like how I grew up and me being creative. That was the influence. I wasn't watching sports on TV. We followed the Yankees because I'm in the Bronx, and that's what you do when you're in the Bronx. You follow the New York Yankees. But it was, I think it's more my environment, my home, and just me having a creative outlet. I was always drawing and I wanted to do something. And I think I transposed that into the DJing. And being creative and wanting to match certain songs,
Is there any like like I find, it's so crazy. I read one of these points. It was like the DJ is like the postmodern artist because they sort of make songs from other people's songs, but they don't have like any of their own substance, so to speak. Yeah, there's something really interesting about that. Do you have like any influences you would say with like other art forms? Like, do you still draw, for example, or do you do filmmaking? Does that inspire you to want to make music? Because it feels like even in DJ culture, right, the concept of a remix is a derivative product of something that exists. So what in your world are you experimenting, I guess, in terms of like creative practices that kind of keep you influenced or keep the juices going?
For me, it's always been visual arts. I have a bachelor's in filmmaking, film production. So I studied at Hunter College, and that was the other side, the visual side, the filmmaking, studying the filmmaking, always wanting to make a film. I was always into trying to put something together. It was like I was trying to piece things together, similar to the DJing, because you're trying to piece the songs together. So I was always trying to piece the things so I studied at Hunter College, the filmmaking, but at the same time I'm doing the filmmaking, I'm doing the DJing, I'm doing them both. And the filmmaking has inspired the DJing because, for example, if I watch a film, and this is right up to this day, I can watch a film and hear a certain dialogue or hear a certain song. I go, oh, haven't heard that before. I'll Shazam it, I'll find it, I'll listen to it. If I can't Shazam it, I'll go right into IMDb. I start researching and I'll find the song and I'll listen to it. And I go, oh, I like that. I like that sample. I think I'm going to try to use this sample. And that's the way my mind works. So yeah, it's the visual arts, big time, huge in my DJing. Yeah, 100%.
And even I guess you even have the painting back there for people looking at the video here with the, I don't know who the artist is or the inspiration.
That's Keith Haring.
That's what it is. Yeah. So it's
Keith Haring.
it's a great little photo.
If for the people watching and are new into this industry, he was the one. If you don't know about a club in New York City called the Paradise Garage, it was around in the late 70s and 80s and into the early 90s. I was never allowed to go. I was too young. But Larry Levan was the DJ, and he was the guy. Like, he inspired all the DJs, the old school DJs. Like, he inspired them. The club's artwork was done by that guy.
Whoa.
So in the 80s, you have this collective of things coming together, the beginning of house music, of hip hop, of this street art, graffiti turning into kind of getting into art galleries, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this guy used to go to this club and was friends with Larry Levan, and they hired him to curate the wall. It was pretty dope. This is stuff you can research this stuff on the internet. But
Mm-hmm.
anyway, we went a little sideways.
No, I mean, I think
a little history.
It's incredible too, because I think that the more that you study the history of these things, you see, like, from the outset where we are today, sometimes it seems like there was like a master plan or something, or like how all this got created, right? But a lot of times it's like just serendipitous, interactions, and even in my own experiences, I've found that when it comes to like finding gigs or meeting people, it's like you just meet up with one person in one location, and it's just a serendipitous interaction, and it prospers into something completely new.
Absolutely. And you never know. That's why sometimes you have to be at certain places. Like I always say, if you can't win the game if you're not playing it. So you have to be at certain places, and you just never know who you're going to meet. That person 2 years later, how maybe it comes back full circle that they're doing something, or they call you to do a remix, or so absolutely. But that era was such a special era. I wish that I was, inspired by those guys. But you know what? My inspiration just comes differently. That's all. I wasn't part of that era,
Yeah. Where would you say that, I guess, a lot of that inspiration come? Would you say some of it is from your time in childhood in the Bronx? Is there a particular art modality or something that inspires you? That
it's back to the filmmaking, graffiti. But as far as like super inspirations, like for DJs, like the first DJs that I followed were hip hop DJs. Marley Marl, Mr. Magic, they had these radio stations, they had these radio shows in New York City in the 80s and into not really the 90s, but kind of throughout the 80s, Mr. Magic, Marley Marl, they had a Mr. Magic's Rap Attack every Friday. So at late nights, because hip hop was only played at late nights, they had like 2 hours and they would play all this hip hop. So everyone in the neighborhood would listen. Everyone had radios and you would listen outside because we were hanging out outside in the summers. Then you have other DJs like DJ Red Alert. Then you had the Latin Rascals in New York City. Then you get into the Louis Vegas, when Louis Vega starts playing the nightclubs, because Louis Vega wasn't doing the radio shows yet. He's starting to play the Devil's Nest. He moved from the Devil's Nest to Heartthrob. So when I started getting into Latin freestyle and moved on into house music, he was the guy. And he's always been the guy. Like, that's the guy if you want to follow a DJ's DJ, someone who's like technical, he's the guy. So I followed him. I was like, because he was the one that I felt that was at that level doing freestyle, and he would be open format sometimes as well. Mm-hmm. He'll probably watch this interview and go, what is this guy talking about? So he would do open format as well, but he was doing Latin freestyle, and he moved into house in the 90s. So that's the guy. That's where I got my inspiration from. And of course, that opens up to other DJs as well, but hip hop. But as far as like Latin freestyle and going into house music, it was always Louis Vega, especially that I was from the Bronx, and he was the guy in the Bronx that moved out. It's always like your hometown guy becomes like, he moves into the city, into Manhattan. That was Louis Vega. He was very popular in the 80s and had a huge following already in the 80s at the Devil's Nest. And he moved on to Hot Throbs, 1018, so on and so forth. And, that's it. Louis Vega becomes Louis Vega. But yeah, Louis Vega, as far as DJs and inspiration at the time, Marley Marl, DJ Red Alert, Chuck Chillout, and the Latin Rascals. Those are the guys I would listen to on the radio.
I find it so interesting because I feel like today, like, I'm always trying to study the metagame. I don't know if that's just part of like the DJ mindset, is you're always trying to be on the edge of like, what is the, not trendy, so to speak, but where is the sound going? And I feel like we're in a state where a lot of Latin stuff has really been heating up, especially like Afro house over the past couple of years has like grown to this insane, level, which is, and it's changed a lot too, but it's for some reason, I'm finding it so intriguing that Latin stuff has become so popular. And then going back to your Latino background, I find it fascinating how many DJs are from like either Puerto Rico or what do you think is the connection there? Is it what? Tell me, George. Like, what do you think is the connection?
Listen, man, it's in the blood. It's in the roots. It's in the. It's like it's in there. You can't get rid of it. Especially like especially when you're from New York. Like when you're from New York, because New York is, remember, it's a melting pot. So like in the Bronx, like I'm growing up, I'm listening to cars go by, listening to hip hop and then freestyle music or reggae, or someone's walking by with a radio, Spanish music, merengue, salsa. You're listening to everything. So it's all there. And it's percussive. It's not just a kick and a hat, it's percussive. So, but I think that it just runs in the blood. It runs in the blood. And just to be clear, like I wasn't born in Puerto Rico. I was born in New York, but my parents are Puerto Rican. So I learned speaking Spanish at home, so I speak Spanish thanks to my mom and dad. That's why I speak Spanish. But that influence for me, and I'm quite sure a lot of the Latin DJs from my era, will say the same thing. Home, the neighborhood, where you're from. It's, you're always a product of your environment. So that's what I feel. But as far as Latinos, man, it's in the veins. That blood runs through there, man. That blood runs through there, man. Always percussive, it's like,
But even like dancing, that's the one thing I found fascinating too. I was speaking to a Colombian gentleman, and my question was like, how, where in the culture, how is it that everybody is such a good dancer in Colombia doing salsa dancing? They're like, you're 2 years old, you're dancing with your grandma, right? Doing salsa. So it's so embedded in some way in the culture. And I wonder if maybe that's part of the connection too, is did you do a lot of dancing like in your immediate family and your family?
We had parties every day. We just had parties. You just play music and people dance. That's it. It's normal. It's nothing that you look around and you go, why are we doing this? No, you don't think about it. You just do it, because it's what we did. So you'll play a record. No one is really DJing. You just play records. You play a record and people just dance. You dance with each other. You have a good time. And then remember, there was also breakdancing in the 80s too. So we did that as well, the young teens, because I always remember my mother saying, "What are you doing?" Like,
did you get out and you do some breakdancing?
Yeah, I did breakdancing as well. I did breakdancing, and I would do like the electric boogie. That was more my thing, because I was embedded in this hip hop thing. I did graffiti. Remember, I used to do artwork. So I did the whole graffiti thing, not on people's property, on a black book. So it's I think it's just a product of where you're from, and that's how I grew up. But as far as the Latino thing, listen, I'm speaking for Puerto Ricans. Like, that's what we do. I'm quite sure, like, right now we're older, so we're not always getting together and throwing these parties. But when we were young, we did that every weekend, man. Every day, just play some records and let's go.
I love
and it's a great thing, man. It's awesome. It's just awesome.
Well, even the community too, right? I think that's the other side of it as well. You're a product of the environment you're surrounding yourself with, right? So if you're surrounding yourself with this community, which is like-minded, wants to go out, wants to have fun, because that is functionally what is happening with the DJ, right? We're creating these spaces for us to get together, to belong, to feel like we can dance and be free.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's also, it's spiritual. It's a way for you to express yourself. It's strange when if you step out and you just look in and you go, what? The DJ is playing other people's music, and you guys, what is going on here? You guys are dancing? Yeah, it's tribal. And I don't mean tribal in the sense, I mean like a community, because when people dance, you hope that you lose yourself, right? In those moments. So yeah, that's what I feel like. It's, it's a way to express yourself. And that's the same thing. Like when we would do parties, in my house, it's the same thing. There's no judgment. You just just be who you are. And that's how we did it. So, but I'm quite sure a lot of families are like that. And I'm speaking for the Latinos, because I'm quite sure Colombians and Cubans are likewise, and Dominicans as well.
So then let's fast forward. So you get exposed to this record, your sister indoctrinates you with a bit of disco, and you decide, okay, George wants to be a DJ. At what point do you start producing your own tracks? I mean, we have your first release at 1996, but
yes.
Were you making music before that? How did you get into that?
I used to, first I was at the radio station at Hunter College. I was one of the DJs there. So I built my name there. The other DJ that was there that was actually leaving because he was building his name was DJ Disciple from Brooklyn. So I was there at the radio station. This is the beginnings of Masters at Work. So that influence is starting up. Now people are making music. I go, oh, these guys are making records and they sound great because remember Kenny Dope was doing the hip hop portion of it and Louis was doing the house portion of it. And that's right down my alley. I go, oh, they're doing hip hop and house. Great, So I was like, I used to record shop like all the DJs. And there was a record store in the Bronx called DJ Specialty. I would shop there all the time. And at the time, I was like, oh, I would like to work here. It would be great. So I remember asking the owner, when I went there one time to buy, I said, hey, listen, if you guys have any openings here? And he was like, no, whatever. The guy who was the house DJ there, this is the way the world connects in this community, was Hector Romero.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. See this connection? A lot of people don't know this. Well, Hector and I always laugh about this. We laugh about this. He was the guy that was there. He left because his career was taking off and he was going on with David Morales, Def Mix. Now they needed someone. So when I showed up again, the guy was like, hey, you still looking for a job? I was like, absolutely. So Hector moved on and I stepped in. So now I'm at this record store, my second university, because this is where I'm learning about the A&Rs, all the producers, who are these guys, like when Armand first showed up on the scene. Like I'm learning because I'm there reading the records. I'm physically looking. I'm ordering the records now. Now I know who the producers are. Don't know them personally, but I'm starting to know, oh, Louis, Kenny, they're Masters at Work now. Oh, there's Armand Van Helden, David Morales. So that was my university. So now I'm saying, what's my next step? I have to make music. So I'm following their footsteps. They're laying the path. Louis, Kenny, Armand, David, they're making music. So they went from being the DJ to making music. So now there was another producer that used to produce freestyle music. His name was MKG. He was the manager, Michael Kid Gomez. And there was another DJ that did the hip hop portion. His name was DJ D-Demo. He was the DJ for a rap group from like the late 80s, early 90s, Nice and Smooth. I don't know if you guys know, but he was their DJ. So he would tour with them. When he would tour, I would do the hip hop as well. So now I'm DJing 8 hours a day. Like that's what I'm doing now. I'm going to Hunter College and I'm coming there for like 3 days and I'm just like all day playing music, learning. So I remember Mike Gomez, the guy who managed the store, people would come in that he knew, other people in the industry, and they would always talk about music production and this and that. So I started to pick his brain. I was like, so if you want to start, like, what do you do? And he was the one that introduced me to MIDI. He was like, well, you would need this piece and you need that piece. And they would have to connect together. You need a sequencer. You need something to make the beats. You need a sampler. That's how I started. So what I would do is I bought a Casio. First, I bought an Akai SO1 that had like 6 seconds. I had no idea what I was doing. I just went and bought this machine, and I bought a little keyboard I found at a flea market that had MIDI. That's all I was looking for. Believe me, I had no knowledge. There's no internet. So I'm just going asking people. So I connect this thing, and I remember bringing it to the job, and I showed one of the other DJs, and he laughed. He goes, "Where'd you get this? Is a toy?" I go, "But it works." I could trigger the sounds. But then I noticed when I was making the drums, there wasn't enough sampling time. So I went and speaking to Mike Gomez, he was like, "Well, you should try to get yourself a Casio FZ1, and it's an older machine, but it has floppy disk, and I think it had like maybe like 30 seconds or almost to a minute if you added memory to it. So I bought that piece. I bought an Alessi's T8, which was my sequencer, and I bought a DAT machine. So I invested in those 3 pieces, and that's all I needed at the time. And that's how I started. It's like DJing. You have to practice. You have to practice. So I would practice all the time, record the cassettes, bring them to the job, not tell anyone. I would just play it. And then people would be like, oh, what's that? I was like, oh, that's something I did. And once you tell them, they start to criticize it. Oh, well, you should do this. So they do that. It sounds like it's empty. It needs this and needs that. I was okay. I took all the criticism,
Mm-hmm.
and I just continued to build. Then they hired Fernando, which is Miss Fernando. See, this is how the world works. It's insane. So Fernando was listening to what I was doing, and I was like doing all these like, I mean, I think about it now, but they were like so dry, the drums. I was just copying everyone else. I was trying to be like Armand. I was trying to be like Kenny Dope. I was trying to be like Louis, so I'm just copying what they're doing. But he heard something in what I was doing, and he was like, listen, he goes, I have a great idea for a song. He goes, if I pay for the studio time, you produce it, I'll do the vocals, and then we'll be like an act, I was like, I'm in. So what I did was I created all the drums at my house. I brought the cassette to the studio. He booked like an hour. We did all this in an hour. I brought the tape in, the cassette. I told the guy, this is what I want to do. I know exactly what I want to do. We don't want to waste any time. I said, I need this kind of drum. I'm going to play everything. I know what the bass line is. Fernando, what the vocals were. I literally laid the entire song out in like 10 minutes because I've been practicing this thing over and over. We laid the entire thing out. Fernando went in their closet. It was somewhere in the Bronx. They had a little studio in an apartment. He went in their closet, but the guys were very good. They were very high end and recorded the vocals. And then we were like, okay, I think we're done. We did everything. I did a couple of passes. I did a couple of bass lines. I chopped up the vocals, did a couple of vocal ad-libs, and then I was like, okay, I think we're done. Can we do I think we wanted to do an instrumental. We did that. We did a couple of passes. And then we took the cassette. I do remember them laughing and going, I don't think anyone's going to sign this. But you got to be careful what you say to people. And I was like, no, I think someone's going to sign this. But that's how naive I was. I was very naive because, it's like ignorance is bliss. If you don't know, you don't know, right? So all I knew was like, oh no, this is like, just like everyone else, I'm going to get my opportunity as well. So I'm just going to continue. I'm just going to go into the story. So we make this song. We get the demo. The song is called Serve. So now I have the demo. I make tons of copies. I have a magazine. The magazine was called DMA. And in that magazine, it had all the addresses and the A&R people in New York City. Now, I'm not mailing anything out. I have my messenger bag. I have like maybe 10 cassettes. I have addresses. I jump on the train from the Bronx to Manhattan. And all these offices are either in the same building or like blocks away. So I'm not going that far. I'm literally one train stop and you start to knock on the doors.
Wow.
Hit up Strictly, you hit up Strictly Rhythm. And I remember this. I say this now, I laugh. They open the door this much for you. Can I help you? I'm like, yeah, I want to drop this off. Got it. Thanks. Close the door. I'm like, so that was literally it. Then the last stop, it's always the last stop, was Northcott, which was Progressive High. Northcott distributed Progressive High and Henry Street, which is where Kenny Dope was on that label as well. So I'm there for Henry Street. I want to be like, the Bucketheads, Kenny Dope. I want to Armand Van Helden. That's where I want to be on. So the guy who opened the door, his name was Jack D. Elliott. He had a label called Progressive High. I didn't know who he was. I just gave it to him. I go, this is for the Kenny Dope, the label that Kenny Dope with Henry Street.
Johnny.
He takes it. Thank you. By the time I get home back to the Bronx, my mother tells me someone named Jack called for you. Here's the number.
Wow.
So I called, and he's like, "Hey George, this is Jack. I heard your song. I want to sign it for my label, Progressive High. And that was it. That's all it took was one. And it
How
was
did you
the
feel
first.
in that moment?
Oh my God. You have no idea how excited I was. I had no idea what I was doing. Signing a contract, please. I was like, where do I sign? You know? But that's how I started making music. I was practicing at home, just like DJing. It's just like anything else. You need the repetition. You need to do it, and you need to study other producers. So
Mhm.
at my second university was the record store. I'm studying everyone. I'm there 8 hours, longer than that sometimes, listening to everyone, the breakdowns. How do they start their song? How far do they go before? So so now we fast forward to, you go into a song like Serial Buff, right? You What I did was I took a song, and this is so old school, and I did this. No one taught me how to do this. This was the only way I could do it. And I started the song from the beginning, and I had a piece of paper, and I wrote every time a drum would come in, every time a pattern would change, I wrote it. I wrote it 2 minutes, 1 minute, first drum, second drum, hi-hat comes in. And I had a whole list. And then that's how I sequence Serial Buff. I
Mhm.
use that. I had no idea 16 bars, 8 bars, 4 bars. I didn't know any of that. I have no music knowledge. And even to this day, I can't read music. I just
Mhm.
go by my heart and my instincts, but those were like, that's how I was starting to make music. It's like out of necessity
Mhm.
comes creativity, right? So I had nothing. So I didn't have a big studio. No one was teaching me. It was rare
Mhm.
for someone to take you in under the wing and say, oh, this is how you do it. So I asked 100 questions. I annoyed tons of people asking the same questions over and over because I couldn't take them home and be like, do this for me. And no one's coming to my house to do that. They're older. They were doing their own thing. So at the record store, I would ask the DJs that would come in, I would ask them 100 questions, and then I would go home and just reps, practice, practice, practice. But that's how I got my first record. And that, let me tell you, that was the stepping stone, because all you need is one to kind of get going, because once that record comes out, now it goes out to the world. At that point, it was more like just New York City, but it
Yeah.
came out to New York City, and now people start to get to know you. They didn't know who you were before. Now they might buy your record, and the record did okay, and that's how I started to build my name. I love how the soundtrack of my dogs barking.
It's okay. You'll sample it later.
Yeah, yeah. Later.
Well, I find that, what I find, incredible about that is today I would say, and I also want to talk to you about this because you're a big advocate of technology and the power of technology.
Yes.
And, but I find, the fact that you had so limited constraints that you'd even pull out the piece of paper and like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
literally, whereas today I feel like when, even as producing and continuing to learn how to produce myself, like you're almost overwhelmed with the number of resources you have
Yeah.
available to you. Like the last thing I would think is like put a vinyl record and then start with a piece of paper.
Yeah, when you have nothing, you have to get creative, and I would, let me tell you, I wanted to make music so bad that I had to go to those levels. You have to. Literally, the record from beginning to end. And that was a process, because I would have to stop it and go back and go, okay, this is the time, and do it again and go, okay, here, it comes here. And I would count the beats. Insane. But, I think back now, I go, man, that's crazy, because it's so tedious, But when you want to get something done,
Yeah.
and you have such a passion, you just get it done. You don't even think about it. At that time, I didn't care how tedious it was. I didn't see it as that. I saw it as, I'm going to make a song.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, then that leads me to an interesting question, about the comparisons of production environment today versus back then. Are there parts of the older production workflow that you miss compared to today? Like you mentioned, I mean, sometimes it feels like there's so much productivity gains with, Ableton or Logic or any of these different digital audio workstations, that it's almost like there's an expectation of a higher velocity to put out tracks. And maybe that's a good thing because you have lots of different ideas. But how do you see that as influencing the workflow? Because it's not like I don't know how much time you spent on that track, but I imagine you might have spent just hours and hours drilling into that track.
Oh yeah. Well, here, the first version of it was sequenced through the paper. Now, this is the difference between now and back then. So the dub versions, if you listen to Serial Buff, there's a dub version. That's an actual live version. That's live. All I did was press play. And I had sequences already laid out on the MMT8. So if I hit a certain number, it would switch over, right? And now all the sounds are coming out. I have 16 drum sounds and samples coming out through a mixing console. I had a Mackie. So now you can punch in the sounds, right? So now I have a piece of tape with every drum sound, every sample. So I can press the sequence, or I wrote the numbers down, what numbers to press if I wanted to get to the bass line, if I wanted to get to a certain part where the samples are, then I could just punch them in and out. So all I did for that dub is press play on the DAT, press play, and use my DJ instincts. And I was punching in and out, moving around. So if you really listen to it, it's not traditional 8, 16, 8, not at all. I had no idea what that was. I learned that later. I had no idea, so I'm just having fun. So that song, I always appreciate that song for that. It's a real DJ song. It's just vibing. I'm just vibing like a DJ, dropping in and out. And I said, I'll do 7 minutes or 8 minutes. And that was the dub. So doing that organic feel there's something satisfying about that, because it's connected to the DJ world, right? Like you're organically mixing songs and I can remix this live, that kind of vibe. Now working, fast forward, working with technology, I love technology because once you learn it and you have the foundation of how to kind of make music, then you can do anything you want. I mean, it's limitless, So for me, like the technology now, I'm a big advocate of Logic Pro X because that's what I learned. I've been using it since 2006 and I mastered it. So I don't want to learn anything else. I don't want to learn Pro Tools, Ableton. I don't want to learn any of that. I have no interest in it. If it's not broken, don't fix it. So I just work off Logic. I've mastered it. I can get anything done there. If I have any idea, I can lay it down. I don't need to rely on anyone. I don't need to text anyone and say, how do you do this? I have my best university online, YouTube. Just go around on YouTube and say, how do you time stretch this? And that's it. And you get it. But I love that for that, the flexibility and the workflow. I can work on something. I don't have to leave a piece of tape or whatever. I just save the files, come back to it. I can have 3 songs working at the same time. Just go in and out. And once you learn all these tools, you can really get creative. And I feel that if you listen to Serial Buff from 98, and then you listen to something new that I've done now, you hear the growth, the musical growth, because I also have the tools. Now I have the tools. I have some musical knowledge now from back then to now. Still can't read music, but I understand the concept, So yeah, I think that, listen, I'm such a big advocate for technology, but now, just to be clear, just because it's easier to make music doesn't mean the music is coming out good. I just want to be clear. Everyone can make music now, but that doesn't mean the music is good, because people are just pumping them out, so, and obviously I do the same, but I'm very conscious of what I'm releasing. I want to make sure that I stand by my work, so I want to make sure that every song that I work on, whether it's a remix or anything that I do, that I finish everything. There's nothing that really goes unfinished unless I'm working on it and I'm going, there's no way to go here. Done. Move to the side. But I might save the drums, use them for something else. I might be like, remix. Let me get these drums. That would be perfect for this, But yeah, technology is it's like that's the good and the bad, right? It's like it's good because you can really make music as fast as you want and do what you want, but it doesn't mean the quality is going to be good. You can have quantity, but the quality is going to suffer. So that's very important.
Sorry, I was just going to ask. So when you're making these tracks, right, you have this point that you mentioned around, you want to make sure that you stand by your work. What are those internal criteria you're using in order to judge whether this is a Saliva Commandos in command, and we're going to get there, level release versus something that, you're not going to put out? Because I feel like sometimes I have a book. It's not visible here, but it's Julie Cameron, the artist's path, I think. And it talks about just focusing on the cycle and process and improving. And sometimes as an artist, I feel like we can get pretty afraid to release our work, right? Because there is that, will anybody like it, right? And sometimes I feel like that's almost the test of the artist, is you have to put it out into the world, because otherwise it'll just stay in and then you just keep modifying it, right? You're like, I'll just tweak the compressor 3 or 4 more. Yeah. So what are those internal criteria that you use in order to decide whether something's ready for release?
Well, the first thing I wanted to comment on what you were talking about, like, the fear of like releasing something. Fear will stop you in moving forward. I always say that to people. You have to, it's okay to have fear, but you got to move forward. You have to do the actions. So with me is like, I'll produce, when I'm making the song, I'm looking at the dance floor, literally in my mind. I'm going, man, the drop here, this is what's going to happen here with this drop. I can see it. So I try to visualize that part, I always try to make sure that my songs have that I can sit down and be like, okay, will I play this? That's big for me, because I make music that I want to play. You guys, listen, you guys are just, I open the door so you guys can look in. That's the way I do it. I'm making music for me, and I'm going, okay, as a DJ, I'm going to play this and I'll make people dance. But I like this. This is what I like, this is the way I want it to sound. So with that said, part of the criteria is that, and what I'm going to say is insane, it might be blasphemous too to some people. I don't want people listening to it. I don't want you saying, change this, because that thing that you said change this might have been the best part of the song. Because remember, what's good for you might not be good for the other person. So I'm always conscious of that, and that's just a life thing. I'm like, too many chefs in the kitchen. So what I do, and I learned this, in my early stages, that was happening to me. I didn't know where to go. It's like, so what am I going to do? How do I go this way? Then I start sounding like this person. So there was one point in my life where I said, done. I'm going to do this. I don't care who likes it, who does. I'm not letting anyone listen to it, and I'm going to release it. Or better yet, this is even better. You play a gig. Don't tell anyone what it is. Don't tell them it's yours. You just play it. And if they like it, the other DJs and the crowd, they're going to let you know. And I've had those moments. Where you play something, you're like, perfect. Then they ask you, who's that? I go, that's me. Oh, that's dope. There it is, So sometimes what happens is that without knowing, you influence people by telling them, oh, I just did this. Because they're all of a sudden their trigger to critique is ready to go. Let me tell you what's wrong with it. So I avoid that. That's big for me. I'm not sharing. I don't share with anyone. When it's ready, I'll send it to you. And you know what? It might not be for you. You might be like, this is dope, but this is not like Saliva. I like your other stuff. Cool. Then there's another DJ that's, this is my favorite song. You see? So I learned that like in the last 7 years. I'm like, okay, I see how this works. I didn't know that before. And now I know that. So now listen, man, I make the music for me, and then I let everyone else in. I let the world in. I let all the DJs in. And then I go, here, guys, see if you like it. I love it, But as far as like when I'm going to release something, I always make sure like that it has the Saliva standard and that it has everything that I do in the song. And I'll listen to it in my car over and over. And then I'll listen to it at the gym. But I like listening while I drive, just listening. And I go, I know what is missing. I forgot this. Is this? It needs this. There's a crash that I need the hi-hat. The buildup is not right. I need the sound effect. You know what I'm saying? So those are the things that I work in my head to make sure. Then I'll listen to it over and over and over again. And then I'll know. I go, this is done. This is done. So I'll just move it over to a folder. And I'll make another one. It's like a conveyor belt. It's the Saliva Commandos conveyor belt of the songs. I have so many. It's insane. And I just keep moving them along. But I make sure that they're finished, And for me, in my mind, they're all great. Someone else might be like, I don't like that. As you learn when you shop things to labels, they're like, this is good, but it's not for us. Because not everything is for everyone, So yeah, that's kind of how I don't know if I answered your question, but That's kind of how I work.
Yeah.
My criteria, how I make music. Literally, it's just for me.
Mhm.
I let everyone else in.
Even on that point, I want to touch on the Saliva Commandos standard, because I was listening to one of your interviews, and if I understood correctly, you did have a song where you sampled a pair of spoons, and I wanted to talk about that track, and I wanted to ask, where did that intuition or desire to sample the spoons come from? Because I find that fascinating.
That was a fun time. That was okay. How I got to that point was that before that, it was exactly what I was telling you. It's like you make these songs and you share them with people, and they're like, this is not finished. You need this, that. And I got done with sending things out, and nobody was interested. And everyone always has a comment, or everyone always has a critique. So I got done with it. So I sat down and I said to myself, okay, I'm going to make a song. And this might not be the right attitude, but this is the attitude I had. I'm going to make a song better than everyone else. There's no such thing, but that was my mindset. I'm going to make a song better than everyone else. So I started to make this song, had some ideas, and I said, oh, you know what this would need? Some original sounds. I said, what if I got some spoons, because they sounded cool? I would clack them together. I said, so I went in my closet and I set up my microphone. Not even on a stand. I think I just set it up weirdly so nothing else touches it. And I had headphones on so I could listen to the song. And I just hit the spoons the way I want it. And all you need is a 4-bar loop. That's all you need. So I did a bunch of takes, and then I just make sure that I got the right loop. And the song is called Offer Murd. So when you listen to that song and you hear the clacking, cat, those are spoons. Those are 2 spoons clacking. Because I just wanted to get creative, But that song with the spoons is what opened up the sound that I was going to create, that I had no idea that I was going to start to create. It evolved to what the sound is now.
Yeah.
Yeah, just trying to be creative,
Yeah. And that leads really well into, the next stop in the adventure of your history, which is In Command, So, as I mentioned, you are, I guess, the founder, owner, creator of In Command. Where did the genesis of that label come from for you? Why did you want to start a label?
Well, if you go back to before TrackSource and the technology that we have now, I couldn't afford a record label. You have to print vinyl. I didn't have the funds for that, so I can't go, spend money $1,000, $2,000, $3,000. The overhead was crazy, to get the pressing, the test pressing. But when this technology came, that you can have a record label where it's all digital, and you can do it out of your house, I thought, I want to do this, because now I don't have to rely on anyone. I don't need a record label. I'm the guy. So whatever I want to make, I'll release. I don't need anyone saying, that's not good. You see? So I said, all right, Commandos, I'm taking control. In command. I'm in command of what I'm doing. It was simple. It was simple. I go, perfect. I'm gonna name the record label In Command, because I'm gonna be a one-man show. I'm gonna make this record label just to release my music. That's it. And that's why I created. That's the genesis of it. Now, at the beginning stages, I did something with some artists, and I was trying to sign other people, and I found that became a headache. I don't need extra people. I don't need people emailing me about when is this, when I just want to make music and release my music. That's why I created the label. So I removed that portion of it, which is only a small moment in time. And I said, I'm just going to release my songs how I want, when I want. I was able to get a distributor, and I hired someone to create the logo. I had the idea already of kind of music revolution, the red star. I go, being in command, the colors black and red. So I shared that with the designer. He came up with the logo. I loved it. And I ran with it, and just started to release music. But prior to that, I didn't know about mastering. So I go, mastering. So I found a mastering company that was cheap. Not like back in the day. So now my overhead, I'm going, okay, I can manage this. And as long as you have good quality music that people can connect to, then you're good. And that's where I am right now. And that's kind of the genesis. Just the label was created just for me. So if
Hmm.
if people that are watching this interview, if you go into In Command on Tracksource, Apple Music, or Beatport, there's only one artist, Saliva Commandos. That's it. That's all. And then of course I venture off onto other record labels like Rogers label Stealth and Mike Nervous Records, Melee's label, so I'll do that, but I try to hold all the good stuff for my label.
And
you
so,
know?
so tactically speaking, though, I mean, when you went out to go start that, like, I'm trying to imagine, like, do I need to go talk to a lawyer? Like, how do I set up a label? How do I get distribution? How did you answer those questions for yourself?
Well, I'm fortunate. I had other friends that had labels already, so they told me this is what you need to do. You have to make sure
Wow.
you register the label. All the legal stuff. They were like, "This is how you do it. You do this. Then you need a distributor. Here's a list." And the first, I was very fortunate that I got in the early stages. So I got in with LabelWorks. They don't take anyone anymore. That's it. They're done, because I have friends who tried, and LabelWorks is like, no, we don't. We're done. We don't take any more record labels. So I got in early, and they accepted. They accepted the terms with me. My dog is walking under and shaking the camera. Shaking the camera. He's thirsty. He's gonna go drink water. So yeah. So I was very fortunate that I got in early, and that I had a couple of friends that already had labels. They connected to different distributors, but I was fortunate that LabelWorks cut me a good deal, and they've been good to me, and I've been releasing my music with them, and they put it everywhere: Tracksource, Beatport, Apple Music, Spotify. So yeah, that's kind of just make sure you get all your legal stuff done.
Hmm.
Register the names, and that's it. And I'm full owner of the
Hmm.
label. I'm full owner of the masters, of the publishing, and the record label. And it's
And what
just
kind
one
of
artist. One artist.
the
I
Saliva
report to
Commando?
one artist. you know?
And I'm curious, what kind of challenges do you find, being that sole owner and runner? Because I know that the whole landscape of, music marketing and music production and releasing has changed so much in the past couple of years. What kind of challenges do you face, or opportunities do you see for being in your position?
One is that there's no money in streaming.
Mm.
That's the big one. So if I had this label 15 years ago, I'd be a millionaire. But
Yeah.
there's really no money in streaming. So you really have to have like an enormous amount of downloads, to see a good return. I've seen decent returns, but I just want to be clear with people. It's like this is passion for me,
Hmm.
and not only is it passion for me, but the upside for me is that it allows me to get DJ work, making music, because that's kind of where we are now, right? You have people tell DJs you got to make music first. That's what they
Hmm.
do now. Promoters go make music, get a couple of songs out there, make sure they're like hits, and then come back and we'll book you. Get a name. That's what promoters do now. So, which is weird, a weird
It's
avenue
very
to take
weird,
on.
yeah.
Weird. Oh, by the way, you want to be a DJ? Go learn how to make music first. Very strange, but that's the challenge is that that the hope that you want to sell. Even if you sold 1 million streams, you got 1 million streams that you would see $1 million. It doesn't work that way.
Hmm.
But the upside is that the financial part does come through my bookings, my DJ bookings.
Hmm.
So that's a good thing.
Yeah.
You know.
And I want to. It didn't quite come up in our story, but I do want to highlight it because you had this moment. I recall I was listening to some of your work where you said that it was like this inflection point for you. You were like right about to quit on making music, and I can't recall if it was prior to setting up In Command or if it was setting up In Command. Can you tell us a little bit about that point in your journey? Because I think it was a really inspiring point to hear about.
Yeah, I used to live in the Bronx. I no longer live there, so I had access to the city, and at the time to go record shop, right? But then digital technology took over. So that of me going, oh, I can't go into the city to buy records all the time. I can't do that. I'm not driving an hour, just to get records and come back. So I was like, okay, so the industry and just the industry, not my passion for it, started to kind of separate. I'm like, over here, it's happening over there. The internet is really, it's out there, but it's not really, there's no track source, there's no Beatport yet. It predates that. So, so now now you have the digital era comes in. So now I'm like, I'm on Logic now. I'm like, okay, I can make music and send the files. I don't have to go to the city, give someone a cassette. So now you can start mailing stuff. But I got to a point where I was like, okay, this is not going to happen for me. This was prior to me making the label. I was like, I'm done. I'm done. This is not, it's obviously not in my cards. Literally said that to myself. This is not in my cards. So I had, you come to that point where you really have to be honest with yourself. And I had to be honest with myself. I'm like, all right, I did it all these years. This is the end of the road. It never really happened. But I remember, this is wild the way life works. I had sent Gladys Pizarro. She used to be the A&R of Strictly Rhythm. At the time, I think Strictly Rhythm was purchased by BMG, so she was no longer there, but she was starting her own label and was looking for music. So I remember I had hit her up because I thought at the time through Facebook, this is the early stages of Facebook. I thought at the time that she was still at Strictly Rhythm, so I sent her some songs, and then she hit me up like a year later. Weird. I'm like, I'm on my way out of this thing. She was like, hey, and I'm like, I got a message from Gladys Pizarro. She's like, hi, George. I knew you sent me some songs a while ago. I'm starting a label. I really like these songs. I was like, really? She's like, yeah, I like some of these songs. Her label was going to be distributed by BMG. So she had she had a corporation behind her. So I was like, wow, this is great. So as I'm throwing in the towel, she's stepping in. So she signed some songs and got a Mr. V remix for me. I didn't know Mr. V, but she got him to remix it. She, hired him, paid him. She knows Victor, hired him, I didn't know him at the time. And he did a remix for me, and the song did well. Kind of started a small relationship with Mr. V, because people now were like, all of a sudden, like Saliva Commandos, people that didn't know the name are like, oh, who is this dude? And then people who knew Serial Buff. Now remember, there was a huge separation from when I did Serial Buff to that moment with Gladys. They were like, oh, this guy's back? He's still around? And his stuff is still good. So I was like, oh, so all of a sudden I'm on SoundCloud. Oscar G puts my song that she released on his mix. I was like, oh, this is dope. Oscar G's playing my stuff already. This is great. So I had a good moment with Gladys. We had a good run for about a year, and then it stopped again. That's where the record label came in. That's where, okay, I'm done with this. I need to control this. I can't have people trying to control what I'm doing. I can't do it because they obviously don't understand my vision. And every time people want to change your vision, I got, and one thing we've learned from history and artists is that, I'll give you a good example. Alanis Morissette, she's Canadian, isn't she? Alanis Morissette. I watched the documentary and she was like, oh, I dropped my first album with the record label and it flopped. It flopped because the record label made the album, not me. When she said, I'm done with this, I'm going to do what I want, how I want, write the songs I want, produce it how I want, with the people I want, then it's her. That's why that album was so successful. And I think that's what happened to me. I just got done. I'm done with everyone else. I said, I'm just going to do this how I want, which leads into the evolution of the Saliva sound. Because I'm just doing what I love, how I love it. And it slowly, I wasn't trying to create a sound. I don't know if you had this question, but I'll let the audience know. I wasn't trying to create a sound. Not at all. I'm just making music how I like. And it came to that the first time I was told that was Roger Sanchez. He's like, dude, you have a sound. Like, I know your sound. I hear it, or you have a sound. I was like, really? And then I started to hear it when I would go out to parties. They were like, yo, I love your sound, man. Your sound is unique. I'm like, wait, I have a sound? I was like, I didn't even know. I'm just making organic music. And then I start to listen. I go, I see the shakers, the drums, the way I put my drums together. I'm just making it from my heart, you know? So yeah, so that's when I wanted to throw in the towel. I don't know if I answered your question, but
No, I mean,
I'm trying to.
no, I think it's fascinating because, like you said, it's this like serendipitous or like just like intervention that just sort of like picked you up and kind of pushed you a little bit into your right
Yeah.
direction. And even the
It's,
way that you're describing how you like, some artists say that it's like you hone in, you figure out what your sound is, but it sounds like you just like stumbled upon it, right? It's like you didn't even
I didn't even know I was doing it until people started, Roger mentioned it to me, and I was like, oh, okay, bro. Roger says, Roger's like, Roger's Roger. Roger says I have a sound. I guess I must have a sound. But then when people start telling me, people who are well-known going, that, by the way, that's hard to do. It's hard to get a sound. Not everyone has a sound. So then I was told this, you have a sound like Louis Vega has a sound, Kenny Dope has a sound, Arma. When I hear their songs, I know it's them. When I hear your song, I know it's you. I was like, oh, that's wild. I was like, okay. Now, when we go back to young George, I always wanted that.
Yeah.
But I was trying to be those guys. I was trying to be Todd Terry. So I had no sound. When I stopped trying to do that, it came. It just slowly came. It evolved. It was all organic. But I'm like, listen, I'm very blessed for it. I wasn't trying to do it in. And then now people try to copy me. It's funny. I hear it. I go, hey, that kind of sounds like me. It's cool,
Well, so even because we touched a little bit on this earlier, right? But like there's the Afro house kind of sound, which has, it's grown a lot and it's changed in a lot of ways too. But I know that some places or some online distributors will categorize you under Afro house. I don't know how you categorize your own sound. I don't know if that's something artists like to do.
Well, excuse me. I always said that my sound was percussive. It's just percussive. And I come from like tribal because at the time in the 90s, that was the sound, tribal. So I just I like to do really good drums. I'm always focused. It's very interesting. People focus on melodies. I focus on the drums first. I'm doing drums before bass line. I'm not traditional. I'm very different from everyone else. But I guess that's what makes me different, and unique in that way. So I just focus on drums. Drums make people dance, So that's the way I see it. So anyway, so yeah, so I'm more percussive, and at the time I went under the genre tribal because that's the genre. Then this Afro thing showed up. I go, well, there's no tribal here, and on Traxsource and Beatport didn't have Afro house yet, so I had to go on the Afro house. I don't make Afro house. I really don't. Kudos to those guys who really focus on that sound, that style, the Black Coffees, the Pablo Fierras, those guys, that's their sound. Like, I always felt I just make house that's percussive and it's very sample heavy, disco influenced, hip hop influenced. So it's really house music, but sometimes there's no category for me. So I'll just go on the Afro house, and I'm sure the Afro house guys go, dude, this is not Afro house. I go, there's no space for me. But here's the crazy part. The crazy part is that all the Afro house guys love my sound. So it's wild. I'm like, all right. So I played this party in San Francisco, and and the guys are like, Afro house. We do an Afro house party. That's why we brought you in. I'm like, great. Well, I just do percussive stuff. I guess that falls into Afro house, And they laugh. I go, really, I'm just kudos to you guys. But and here's the other thing with that. I don't want to be put into that box. So that's why if you look at my stuff, like my latest release, Watch the Sun Go Down, that's out now, it's on Traxsource. It's house music. I've done techno. I've do Afro. I do disco house, and then the percussive stuff that falls under Afro house. So I just and what other genres? I think a lot of I fall into a lot of disco house as well. I just like to do what I like, but it's always percussive. Because I always start with the drums first, so it's always percussive. So for me, I just like I had a song 5 years ago. I just call it house. That's how I like to do it,
Yeah. Well, even like I think of one of your tracks. I think it's Remember in 1984 might have been the other one. And they have like that disco, but you're just like, okay, but this is like a really thundering drum.
Yeah. Well, I make it like I said, the melody for me. I'm telling you, this is so blasphemous, man. But I just don't care. For me, the melody is second. It's strange. People are like, what? No, you need the. I go, no, it's second for me, and it works for me. Because once I have the dopest, hardest drums, then I could add the sample. That's how I work. The sample is second. I go, I have dope drums. Now, if I can get a dope sample that's going to work with this, we're good. And that's how I build a lot of my songs, you know?
And so you mentioned this point around sampling, and actually it's funny because we talked a bit about this, I think your track NY Gospel on Nervous, right? And I listened back to it and I was like, oh my gosh, he sampled this old, I think it was a 70s like funk gospel, Can You Lose by Following God? Right? And I was like, whoa, I didn't think anybody would turn that into like a house track. So, sampling is so fundamental to house music. How are you in your workflow? How are you finding and identifying new samples? Because it seems, I've had some conversations with DJs and artists, and it seems like a lot of times there's these kind of huge, what would you say, epicenters of samples, right? Like Carrie Lewis, Dance With Me, right? That sample, or any of these things that are just like, you hear them and instantly you're like, okay, I know that. I've heard that like a bajillion times. How as an artist are you finding unique and fresh samples? Where are you digging for tracks? Are you looking in vinyl record stores? Are you in your closet messing with more spoons and percussions and other stuff?
I'm in my closet playing with the spoons, I do. It's the DJ thing, I research. This is the best advice I can give people that are starting in this industry. Do your research. Research the history of house music. How important would that be, right? If you learn the history before you're like, I bought a controller, now I'm gonna play all these parties, at least know the history. So for me, I come from that cloth of history, researching. So I research music, and not only that, it goes back to my filmmaking. That part, I'm influenced by everything. If I hear something, I want to find that song. So I start searching everywhere until I find it. And I go, I'm going to sample this. And if I can't sample it, if it doesn't work, it's okay. But I'm always looking. And if I use a sample that someone else used, I do it all the time. I can find a song that Armand, the Basement Jacks, Fatboy Slim, that they've used. And I'll use it, but I'll flip it. You have to, if you're going to sample something, you can't do the same thing that they did. You can use it and it could be recognizable, but you have to flip the sample. And I'm always focused on that. I'm making sure that I flip the sample. And if the sample sounds too close to how they did it, then I'm like, all right, I have to change it. It's not going to work for me. Because the last thing I want to do is remake someone else's song. But for me, finding a good sample, it's about researching and listening to the song and hearing it. I just been fortunate, like my ears hear it. I go, oh, that's the sample. Then I throw it into my workstation. I'll loop it and listen to it over drums. I go, oh yeah, this is going to work. Create a bass line out of it. I go over and then you get the vocal, use the vocal parts. I can create from the vocal parts. I can create a chorus and a verse. The verse is the sample. Then I use the vocals, as the verse, and so I'll use a small portion of the song and break it into two parts and make a chorus and a verse, So listen, I'm all about research. It's so important, But I'm not. One thing I won't do is I won't give away my secrets.
Okay, fair enough.
I'm not gonna be like, hey, this is how I do it. Then there'll be 100 salivas.
Too many salivas.
We can have 100 salivas.
Incredible.
But so I'll tell you, every time I talk to other DJs, here's the question. What do you do? How do you get those shakers like that? I go, really? I go, so I'm going to tell you my secret. So then you can do exactly what I'm doing. I said, just listen to my song. If you want to try to copy it, Yeah. But I get that asked a lot. I don't give any of my secrets away.
And, rightfully so, right? In order to, create and curate that sound. I'm always just so fascinated how how is it like, going back to what we were talking about before we started the recording, that samples are, they're everywhere. And even you did some work with the street players, or I guess what most people know as the bomb. We were talking about this, right? And then you said, I didn't want to do it the same way that Kenny Dope did it. I wanted to flip it. I wanted to create something else. And I mentioned to you, I said, I heard that at Sunnyside Pavilion here in Toronto with Mark Knight playing. And I was like going bananas. I was like, what is this, right? It was just that horn over and over again.
Yeah, the horn. I love that horn. Well, thanks to Kenny Dope. I mean, he's the guy who, see, this goes back to research and being a crate digger. He found that sample. Mm-hmm. It's funny, I'm going to give this guy props. Kenny Dope, without Kenny Dope using that sample, there is no Pitbull using that sample. You see how that works? Pitbull doesn't know about that sample. He knows because Kenny Dope used it. Mm-hmm, So it's that, it's that thing. Yeah. It wasn't, I will never take credit like, oh, I found this sample. No, that's Kenny Dope, and he used it well. And some other producer used it as well. I don't know their name, so I'm not going to shout them out. But and I just wanted to do my version of what like the Saliva Commandos feel would be to it. So that's why I made that, So I'm glad you like it.
Oh no, like I said, I was in the crowd. I was just like sweating, and I was just like, this is incredible. That's
awesome.
How as like, I guess my perspective is, like I mentioned to you, I learned so much from you old school DJs, because I feel like you have such a passion and appreciation for the history, the whole perspective, the long tail, knowing that Frankie Knuckles was in New York, then he went to Chicago, then he started the house music, then it came back, all over. How do you look at, I guess, today's industry? Because nowadays it is so much easier to get started as a DJ and a producer. And even what you mentioned, there's some of these kind of paradoxes where it's like, well, go produce music before you start DJing. It's like, but I want to learn how to DJ. Right? So
strange world.
Look at our current climate, and what advice would you give for DJs, prospective DJs, and prospective music producers coming into that? Because I feel like it's very easy to get sucked into this world where you're like, okay, well, I need to focus on building a huge online platform and getting the best photo, and it's maybe not necessarily about how great of a crate digger you are, but how great of a photographer or like videography team you have.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for those people who are, feeling kind of demotivated perhaps, or like things are against them, or that all the headwinds?
Well, the first thing is that I'll say with anything that you do is that you never quit. You never stop, because when you stop, you have no idea what was a year coming. You have no idea what's your track. Everyone's on their own track. So you can't stop. You don't know when it's going to happen for you. Just like my story, right? It took me forever, and then it happened, and I was ready to give up. So that's the first thing. You can't give up. So whether it's not working for you now, it doesn't matter. You have to just continue. But, I think that the paradigm is changing, this whole, how a DJ, what a DJ is now, and one thing I will not do is say, well, this generation, that's irrelevant, because this generation is a product of their time, and their time is this technology. Now I think it's important to know your history. I think that it's important to, if you're a baseball player, you're going to have old school baseball players that you followed, a certain team that you like to follow, right? So it's the same thing with DJing. It's an art form. So you should know, there's a new technology. Yes, there's a sync button. Okay. But you should learn how to beat mix by ear. You should learn these things. And if you want to use the sync button, so be it. Can you be creative? Can you make the people dance? Because at the end of the day, it's not about you. It's about the people that dance. And when I was playing in San Francisco, they were like, oh, that's great. You did such a great job. I said, listen, you guys pay me to make them dance. It's not about me. It's about them. Are they dancing? Can you learn the technique of this record is not working? How can I make these people dance? Or you're just going to play for yourself and be like, no, well, this is good. How can they not like it? It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work. This song is good. How can you not like it? It just doesn't work that way, because you can play a song that you don't like, but the crowd loves. I do it all the time. I play house song. I'm not a big fan of this song. I would never play this song. They love it and they're dancing. I guess that's all that matters right now, you know? So it's just learn your, you have to learn the craft and the history, and you need the reps. You got to put in the work, and that's just a life lesson. Whatever you put in is what you get out. You go discount, you get discount. You have to make sure that you put in the work. So that's my advice. I don't care how you do it. I don't care if you just play with a laptop, but at least understand beat mixing. Understand before you get to the sync button. Understand that. Understand the main players that came before you. Mm-hmm. Now, this generation, Gen Z, might not go back to Larry Levan. They might not go back to Frankie Knuckles. Maybe you want to go back to Armand, 90s, or you know what I'm saying? Maybe even Louis, although Louis might be a little older. But, because this Gen Z, they don't know who those guys are. So then maybe go to Mark Knight. Mark Knight's been around for a while. Mark Knight mixes by ear. So sometimes, this generation, they might not want to go that far back. But at least those guys, even from the late 90s and 2000s, early 2000s, these guys, they know their history because they were playing on vinyl. So they understand beat mixing. They understand what it is to curate a party, to curate a decent playlist. They understand what it is to play a party and have a playlist set and it's not working. Time to get creative, right? So you have to understand that. And I say that because that happens all the time. I make a playlist. I go, okay, I'm going to play this for this party. And then you start playing and that's not the crowd. You start playing and you go, okay, now they actually like this. I'll go away from that. Abandoned ship. We're going to play this because they're dancing to this. And I'll stick to that. And obviously that comes with time and repetition. So it's about reps and just, if you're learning the history, then you respect the game. You got to respect the DJ culture. And for someone like me, man, I love it. I have a passion for it. I know my history. I'm fortunate enough to be making my history, so I never thought that would be happening for me, but I'm, trying to make my mark in this industry. And I don't wake up every morning saying, oh, I got to make my mark. I just make music. And that in itself becomes organic and the world takes it on. You guys own it. And I just keep making the music. I put my head down and just work, but yeah, that's the advice. The advice is a lot of repetitions, respect the game, respect it, know your history, learn your craft. Because anyone could buy a controller and get on the sync button and go on YouTube and be like, okay, but then you don't know how to curate a party. Those things are important. That's how I feel. That's the DJ side. Now, as a producer, once again, if you want to make house music, learn that genre. If you want to make Afro house, then learn the players. Go to Black Coffee and listen to all his stuff, right? Go to Pablo Fierro, listen to all their stuff, his stuff. So learn whatever genre you want to get into. If you're going to get into techno, learn those guys, the main dope guys who are making dope music. Learn those guys. Don't just start making random shit and think that, that my work is good, but you don't even know who these main guys were that were making this music before you. That's it. Just learn. And obviously, here's one big key of advice for someone who's going to produce music. Less is more. If you buy too much too much producer gear, this, that, then you're going to spend all your time learning it. And you're not going to make any music. Less is more. One simple machine, one simple DAW that you can learn. I'm an Apple guy, so an iMac, a laptop, decent speakers, decent keyboard, and then whatever in between the ears. That's it. Get creative, But less is always more. People go like, "Oh, I have a huge studio." You don't need all that. You don't need all that. Believe you me, when people follow me on Instagram, my fans, they look when I post the videos. I'm very minimal. I'm basic as it comes because I am just creative. That's my advice. What was that?
I was just going to say, the advice less is more even in sound construction, right? Because some of even the 90s house tracks that I love, right? They're so simple. It's an open hi-hat, a kick, a bass line, maybe a sample here and there, and that's it. But yeah. but like it's a DJ making that. Remember, always remember that.
those producers were DJs, all of them. You start looking back, you'll find one or two who were rare, like Mark Kitchen, rare. He wasn't a DJ. He was just a producer, and then kind of became a DJ. So he was more musically inclined in that sense. But it's always, DJ first, then you make the music. Now 2024, make music then DJ. it's just crazy, but that's the the paradigm shift. So this is where we are. You have to roll with it.
Incredible. Well, we're coming up to time here, George, but I do want to ask, I guess this last section, I think I prepped you with it, but three tracks, Under the Radar, On Repeat, and Your Guilty Pleasure.
You mean like 3 tracks that my favorite tracks that I produced?
Yeah, 1 track for each category.
Oh man. So Off of Merd, because that song is the one that opened the gates for me in the Afro house world. That one, Roomba. It's a song that was a little underrated. I held on to it for a while. Send it out to a couple of big labels. You know who you are. And they said no. Then I sent it to my boy Melee. He's like, yo, I'll take this. And then I released it. And then those labels were like, hey, why didn't you send us that? I'm like, dude, come on. I sent this to you. But a track called Roomba on Club Bad. And of course, on my label, Promesa, which is Brazilian vibe with the vocalist Kelly Denise, Brazilian. And it was the first time I did something that had a Brazilian vocal on it.
Oof.
So there it is. I think you wanted 3 songs, right?
Yeah,
I think.
3 tracks. Love it.
There it is.
Yeah.
3 tracks. There
Absolutely.
It is.
Amazing. Well, thank you again so much, George, for coming on and sharing all this wisdom and just like your authenticity as well as your story and just giving those inspiring points to those prospective DJs and producers who they do, on one hand, yes, we can embrace a little bit more of the present day, but I do think, like you said, we have to look at the culture because it's so rich and it's so much more than just getting up on the decks and being the center stage. There's a whole echelon of things you have to respect, and the more that you learn, the more that you're like, oh God, I can't believe I did that.
Just respect the culture, learn your history. Use the sync button if you want. I don't care. But, be creative and learn how to curate a party, a playlist, a good playlist. And learn how to deviate if you have to. That's all. Those are important things,
Incredible. All right. Well, this has been the Beyond the Decks podcast. Make sure that you tune in to all the different podcast providers that you listen to, Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube podcasts. And George, we're wishing you well with the sound and the continual elevation of In Command and your own sound.
Thank you.
And maybe we'll have you back on some point on the podcast to see what the next level of Saliva Commandos is like.
Absolutely. I'm game. Thank you so much, Robert, for having me. Thank you. Peace out to everyone.
Of course.
And follow your dreams. Remember, everyone, you got to follow your dreams. That's what it's about.